today. We have a hashtag #AliLondon as well. If you don't know, Ali is this kind of strange, inaccessible way of saying accessibility. So it's the A and the Y, the first letter and the last letter of accessibility, and the 11 characters in the middle of it. So my name is Andy Ronksley. I'm a freelance digital accessibility specialist. If you want to know a little bit more about me, you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. An announcement that I would like to make on behalf of a friend. Accessibility Scotland Conference. Anyone heard of that? Few people. Okay. So have a look. Accessibility Scotland is a fairly new conference. It's been going for 3 years, I think now. So this year will be the 4th year that it's taken place. And every year it's got a little bit bigger. I think the first year was like 50 people, and then the first year I went was last year. It was about 150 people. It's a really cool conference. Lots of knowledgeable, interesting people there. They are planning their next conference, which is the 25th of October this year, coming up in Edinburgh. So a lovely city. They have a call for speakers open at the moment. So if you're interested in speaking, you have until the 31st of July to make a submission. One of the other cool things that I really love about this conference is it's quite low key. So the day itself is £60. So the guys that organise it are really keen that it's an affordable conference. So it's not hundreds of pounds, it's £60. They also do a very cool thing as well, where you can buy a sponsored ticket. So for somebody who maybe £60 is still quite a lot of money, you can buy a ticket, and they have a pool of people who would benefit from you donating them a ticket, which is very cool. The other thing I really like as well is they're very open to having new speakers. So maybe someone who's doing their first talk. It's not someone who's proclaiming that they are an expert or a thought leader or anything like that. It's just very low key. Everyone's very approachable. I'd highly recommend you check it out. The topics this year are ethics and accessibility. So ethics seems to be quite a big topic in technology at the minute. I've seen a number of conferences and talks around that, so it's quite cool trying to bring those two topics together. So check them out. The website is accessibility.scot, which is one of the best top level domains I can think of. So yeah, check them out. Okay, today hopefully I sent out a message before about how to get on the Wi-Fi. That's the first time I've done that, but that's genius. I'll tell people before they arrive. So if you want to use the Wi-Fi today, O2 Wi-Fi is what you need to connect to. We've got a couple of ways that you can ask questions today. So at the end of each talk, we'll do some Q&A. Myself and Raf, my co-organiser, will run around with mics. But if for any reason you don't want to grab a mic and speak in public, then go to a website called Slido on your laptop, mobile phone, slido.com. And then we have an event code for tonight, which is T203, so Tango 203. Just type that in on the homepage. There's a box right on the homepage, very easy to see. It'll take you to the room that we have set up for tonight, where you can ask questions. Those questions will come through to me and Raf, and then we can ask them for you at the end. So we always do this at the start of events, just a quick show of hands to try and get a feel for where everyone has come from tonight. So there's Al's not here to remember tonight. I'm going to forget all these things. So who works in the corporate sector? Okay, about 20 people. Anyone in the charity sector, third sector? Probably less, for about 10. Thank you. Public sector? About 10 as well. Okay. Any people who work for themselves, freelance, with me? About 10 as well. Okay. Any designers in the room? Good number? 15 or so. Developers? Same. 15 or so. Content people? 2, 5 or 6. What else? Policy?
Management.
What was it?
Management.
Management. Okay. Hands down. Your accessibility specialists? 5, 6. Okay. So a good mix of people in the room. which is always good to see. Is anyone who's this their first event? 15, 20? Welcome. I hope it's the first of many. It's really good to see you here. Okay, the agenda for tonight. Again, we're really lucky to have two great speakers joining us tonight. So we have Jan Wiles, all the way from Australia. I think this is a record, right? It's probably the longest journey, I would say. Here for London Tech Week, right?
Yep.
Yep. So Jan messaged us a few months ago and said she'd really like to talk, so we was like, yes, please, come join us. So Jan's going to be talking about social media accessibility, which is a really important topic. Something that we can all contribute to, right? Because we're all, if you're on social media, you're generating a lot of content, and there's some things that I'm sure Jan is going to make us aware of that we need to make sure we're doing when we make that content. So that's going to be 45 minutes. We started a little bit late actually, because we had some YouTube live stream issues. So probably go to about 10 to 8 or so, and we'll have a break. After that, we have Robin Spinks from RNB. She's the Royal National Institute of Blind People. Robin's going to be talking about an app called EYEWARE that RNB have developed in partnership. What was the name company? Connected Places Catapult. Yeah. Okay, so they developed it in partnership with another company. If you haven't got the app already, take the opportunity to download it in the break. And then at the end, if you want, if it's not chucking down with rain and you want to stay out longer, we will go to a pub afterwards, which is just around the corner. It's nice and quiet, so we can have a chat. How we get there, we come out the front door, we take a left, walk for about a minute, and then we literally just cross over the road and we're there. So it's about 200 yards. So please join us if you would like to. Before we get started, just a quick thanks to all our sponsors. So thank you to Sainsbury's, who are providers of the venue. So this is one of the best meetup venues in London, if not the best. Very generously let us use it every month and help us with all the facilities and that kind of stuff. So please show your appreciation for Sainsbury's.
Barclays access as well. Oh, was that not on the whole time? Well, did everyone hear what I was saying? Maybe not, I don't know. Well, thank you to Barclays as well. So Barclays very kindly have sponsored us for the whole year. So they give us the money to do things like the pizzas and the drinks outside and the live captions that you see here. Has anyone not seen live captions before? Everyone has? Okay, so that's good. So you all know it's Orla. He's sat down here in the corner who is diligently typing away on a magic keyboard, and stuff like this comes out. So thank you to Barclays. You know, they allow us to do. Also, they allow us to film the talks. They give us the money to film the talks and get them onto YouTube, that kind of stuff. So it just makes the event a lot more professional. Thank you to MyClearText as well. So that is Orla. So MyClearText do an amazing live caption service, both in person and also they can do it remotely as well. So check them out. And then also thank you as well to a company called Meetup Video. So at the back we have Peter and Janos from Meetup Video, who are recording the talks, running the live stream for us. And then afterwards they'll help us get the videos onto YouTube with captions and all that kind of stuff. So again, check them out. They can help you with all your video processing and all that kind of stuff. Okay, a couple of things about the venue before we get started. If you want the toilet, they are back the way that you came in. So as you head back down towards the lifts, the gents is on the left and the ladies is on the right. Litter, the venue is always spotless when we come in, so please let's leave it in the same way. You're all allowed to bring your food and drinks in, but please take any litter out with you. Then Raf and I don't have to clean up. And then there's no planned fire drills this evening, so if the alarm does go off, could be the real thing. So the fire exits, again, as we go back towards the lifts, on the left and the right, there are the two emergency exits there. So that is the intro. So I'm going to hand over to Jan now. We're going to do a switch of laptops, so fingers crossed that goes smoothly. And then we will crack on.
Excellent, thanks.
Try not to lose this.
Technology.
Yeah.
want to check the mic is working first.
Can you hear me? Oh, that doesn't sound like the mic is working. Maybe it's just my voice. So it is working?
Yes, you did, yeah.
And the recording, am I in the right place? Excellent, thank you. What just happened? Okay, so apologies for, this is one of those, who knows WCAG 2 really well here? You know, there are exceptions to certain rules. One of them is a test. So the people that can't see this, I can't explain what it is because this is an exception to the test. Does anyone know who these two guys are? Oh, no, that's not helpful at all. Okay. What's going on? Okay. Anyone know who those guys are? Excellent. So this is Sam and Dean Winchester, and I'm bringing them up because I'm a Supernatural fan, but they are also very well known, and the TV series, the actors are very big on social media, so there's a few things that we kind of use, but I'm using them as an example about why I'm sitting down. So basically, I dislocated my toes back in February, believe it or not. And Hollywood would have you believe that, you know, you just snap that dislocation back in and everything's fine. You look a bit sulky for about 30 minutes, and there was actually, you know, a scene where they had to, you know, put someone's shoulder back in. But that's not the case with dislocations. One of the main actors actually dislocated his shoulder, and he was in a sling for 4 months. But on the TV show, he was also in the sling, but they couldn't say it was because he dislocated his shoulder because that was just too wimpy. So they had that he broke his collarbone instead. So that's why I'm sitting down today. I'm a bit croaky because I woke up with a cold this morning. I flew in yesterday. It's a 9-hour flight followed by 1.5 hour layover and then a 15-hour flight. So hopefully I'm making sense. If not, I'll come back and do it again when I'm a little bit better. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Excellent, great. How are you going with the accent? Good. Yeah? Okay, great. So I speak a lot, I travel the world speaking at conferences, which sounds much better than it actually is. And I spoke at Michigan State University, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, "Gosh, I loved your presentation. You know, didn't understand a word you said, but I loved your accent." I'm like, thanks. So please, you know, if you need me to slow down, let me know. Anyway, so a little bit about me and kind of the resources we offer, not in a way of you should buy things from us. Feel free to buy things from us if you want, but we have a whole lot of free resources that we want people to use. I started Accessibility Oz in Australia in 2011, and we opened a US branch in 2015, and we moved into Europe, UK, last year, and I'm part of the Victorian government delegation for London Tech Week, which is where they're promoting Victorian government companies here. So when I started Accessibility Oz, this is our team at CSUN in March this year, I wanted to provide employment for people with disabilities as well as providing accessible services. And so throughout the 8 years that we've been operating, I've had staff with a whole variety of different disabilities, including dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairments, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, PTSD and Asperger's. And we do an anonymous survey every year of all my staff, and 60% of my staff identify as having a significant disability that affects their daily life. So there are a lot of things that we do as a company to support people, our employees that have disabilities. One of them is remote working. We have staff in Madrid and Poland. We have staff in the US, as well as providing assistive technologies as needed. A little bit about me, I won't go into this because it's a little bit too much, whoa, how wonderful I am. But I started in Accessibility Oz in 1998, which is a really, really long time ago. I worked on the first accessible website in Australia, and my kind of claim to fame in my first few years of my career was that I spent 6 years with the W3C contributing to WCAG 2. I founded Accessibility Oz in 2011. We have a number of products and services, and I spoke at the United Nations in 2015 on the importance of web accessibility, specifically in emergency situations, because what we found was we had these 2009 bushfires where it was, you know, absolutely catastrophic, 60,000 homes lost, 300 people died, 250,000 wildlife, you know, animals were killed. And it turned out that 47% of people who died were people with disabilities. And they had a Royal Commission into it, and it was one of the things that they didn't actually even talk about in the Royal Commission. So that's what I talked about at the United Nations. So we have offices in Melbourne, Brisbane, Portland, San Francisco, New York, Madrid and Gdansk. And I want to talk a little bit about our service because a lot of them, and products, because a lot of them are free. Ozplayer is our accessible video player. There's only 2 accessible video players in the world. One of them is ours, surprise, surprise, and the other is AblePlayer. Every year I do an analysis of, and I get people with screen readers and, you know, different assistive technologies to test 30 odd video players. The latest results are available on our website, and if you want, say you're using Brightcove or Kaltura or whatever, and you want those results, feel free to email me and I can send them to you. And feel free to say you're wrong and I can prove that I'm right, because I've had a number of organisations come to me and say, you did not find those results, and I'm like, yes I did. Ozart, which is our automated accessibility testing tool, OzWiki, which is our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code and solutions. And as an attendee of one of my presentations, I'm happy to give you 6 months free access to OzWiki. So if you're interested in that, you do have to give me your email address. Andrew can send that out tomorrow, and these slides will be available. We also have a site called a11yvoices.com, which is a series of blog posts written by people with disabilities about their accessibility experiences. So if you need to go to management and sort of explain why things are important, then that's a great site. And we're always looking for bloggers, and we always pay our bloggers, so reach out to us. And it's a worldwide site. We have a series of accessibility fact sheets on our website, which were commissioned by the Australian government. Which is, you know, why, you know, it's all broken into categories, images, content, coding, JavaScript, forms, etc. Why it's important, what happens if it's not accessible, a series of testing checklists, and a series of developer correct and incorrect code, especially the JavaScript ones. You've got things like accessible progress meters and things like that, which are all available under Creative Commons. So as developers, you can grab that code and use them as you wish. We have an accessible slideshow, which is also available under Creative Commons. If you search for GitHub Accessibility Oz slideshow, you can find it. And we did some work with California community colleges, because we have a $2 million 5-year contract with them, where we developed 16 developer videos, each one under 5 minutes, which is things like, you know, why are HTML headings important, what is ARIA, when not to use ARIA, how to write an error message and things like that. Now, a lot of people here in the room probably know all those things already, but they're a good resource to send out to people who are just learning about accessibility. And I promise that's enough about my company. Okay, so social media. What is social media? So I came across this earlier this year, Social Media Explained. Twitter, I'm eating a donut. Facebook, I like donuts. Foursquare, this is where I eat donuts. Instagram, here is a photo of my donut. YouTube, here I am eating a donut. LinkedIn, my skills include donut eating. Pinterest, here's a donut recipe. Spotify, now listening to donuts. And G+, back when there was a G+. Google+, I'm a Google employee who eats donuts. But one of them is missing, which is Tumblr. So someone added this, which was Tumblr. Here's a picture of a donut replugged with a GIF that somehow pertains to Supernatural, because Tumblr is all about Supernatural. So why is it so important? There are almost 3.4 billion active social media users. On average, people have 5.5 social media accounts. The average time spent on social media is 116 minutes per day, which is huge. 91% of retail brands use 2 or more social media channels, and 81% of small and medium businesses use social media. Now, all these stats, if you want to know where they come from, I'm going to send Andrew a link to the presentation with all the links to all the resources, so feel free to have a look at that. There's also some stuff about social media and teenagers. So 81% of teenagers feel more connected to their friends due to social media. 69% believe it helps them interact with a more diverse group of people, which is really important in this day and age. 68% feel as if they have people that will support them in tough times due to their use of social media. And it's important to know that, yes, almost 90% of 18 to 29-year-olds use social media, but almost 80% of people 30 to 49 use social media, 65% of people 50 to 64, and over 35% of people 65 and older use social media as well. So it's not just a young person's game, it's something that is important for all groups of people. In terms of the percentage that use each social media, I don't actually think WhatsApp is a social media network, but feel free to disagree with me. But it goes from WhatsApp at about 22%, and then up to YouTube at about 72, 74%, in the order of WhatsApp, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And so the big ones really are Facebook at 68% and YouTube at 72%. And if I haven't convinced you, unemployment of people with disabilities is about 10%, and the percentage of recruiters who use LinkedIn is about 95%. And if you think about people who maybe are in our industry, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, then that's going to really, make your chances of getting a job difficult. And the percentage of HR managers that have reconsidered hiring a candidate after looking at social media is 55%. So it is really important for all users. And I'm just going to tell you a couple of short stories that I've been gathering in the last 6 months. So in the US, there was the systems, the sites, Uber and Lyft and things like that, kind of were slow to address accessibility needs. Uber was actually in trouble in Australia because they didn't allow, one of the drivers didn't allow a guy with a guide dog to get into the car, and it turned out that that guy with the guide dog was our Disability Discrimination Commissioner. So that was a big mistake on Uber's part. But Lyft approached things a little bit differently. So what happened is there was one person who tweeted at Lyft and said, "Hey, I'm vision impaired. Your product is fantastic in that, I can." I can't hail a cab, but I can order a Lyft, I can order an Uber, but your app is not accessible. And they said, well, why don't you come in and tell us what it is that we need to fix? And so he went there a couple of times and spent a couple of hours talking to them about what they needed to fix with their app, to the point where they said, you know what, we want to employ you as our accessibility manager. And so now he has a team of people. So that would never have happened if Twitter wasn't accessible to him. Thanksgiving. So I was in the US on Thanksgiving, and it's like everything shuts down in the US. Thanksgiving Day, it's kind of bizarre. And so I spent that time going through my LinkedIn contacts. We were looking for a US salesperson, and just sending them emails, anyone who had sales in their title, would you be interested in this role? And someone responded to me immediately and then asked for my phone number, and we had this 2-hour phone call on Thanksgiving, and I ended up hiring him as a US salesperson. So once again, something that wouldn't have been available if LinkedIn was not accessible. Facebook, in Australia, we're a very small country, and we're kind of a little bit behind. Don't tell anyone I said that. I know we're being recorded. But especially with medical things as well. And there's also a lot of things that are kind of accepted in Australia that are even banned in other areas of the world. And so a friend of mine undertook what's called lap band surgery, and it's actually banned in a number of areas because it's, it causes respiratory problems and malnutrition and things like that. And she had struggled with it her entire, for the 10 years that she had it. She had huge problems with eating and throwing up and things like that. But she was just told over and over again by doctors that, that it was in her head, that it was nothing that she could do. And so it was one day she, had had enough, and she joined some Facebook groups about people who have lap bands. And she found that all these people were having them removed, and that all the things that doctors had told, was just in her head or was just happening to her were known issues that, were happening across the world and were causing it to be banned in other locations. But the doctors in Australia weren't, having a bar of it. So once again, something else that she would never have learnt if Facebook wasn't available to her. And one thing there is a story about this guy who was watching YouTube videos and he was eating a steak and he started choking on the steak and he was by himself. So while he's choking, he types in, how to do the reverse Heimlich maneuver or by himself, and it found out that what he had to do, he had to bend over a chair to cough out and things like that. So, he obviously lived to tell that tale. But, social media is something that it does change people's lives. A lot of people think that social media is kind of fluff, that it's not really important, but it is. It's really, really important, and it's more important to people with disabilities because often they don't have an opportunity to access information in any other way. So that's why every year I do this analysis of social media. I've been doing it for 4 years, and hopefully, slowly, it's getting a little bit better. So the 5 reasons behind social media use. The first is personal, so creating online commentary of personal thoughts, sharing photos, discussing social events. Work, things like LinkedIn, creating a resume, professional connections, discussing job opportunities. Entertainment, so this is where Supernatural comes in, sharing videos, meta-analysis of episodes, strategies for online games, following celebrities. And then you've got provision of goods and services, so sharing information about a product, responding to user feedback about a product, accessing government services. So, for example, I do a lot of flying, and there's a flight that's 12 minutes long from Canberra to Sydney. And there are always these tiny little planes, and you deplane onto the tarmac. And so we deplaned onto the tarmac, and it was 38 degrees. Do you guys work in Celsius here? Yeah, 38 degrees Celsius. It was really, really hot. And so about 100 feet away was an open door to the terminal, and so we all went towards it, and the people were like, oh no, you're not allowed to go into that door, that's not authorised. We have to wait for the terminal door to be opened. And so we waited, and it's 38 degrees, and it's, thank you. And it's hot, and I'm missing a meeting, but I'm also getting sunburnt, and we're standing. It's not pleasant. So after about 40 minutes, I tweeted to Virgin Australia, which was the airline, and I said, not sure why we're standing in 38 degree heat when there's an open door, 50, 100 feet away. And it's still on the Accessibility Oz Twitter, if you want to go look for it, a few years old now. And there was no response from Virgin Australia, but 5 minutes later, people came out of that door and ushered us through. So, it's amazing how the way you can reach out to people via social media, especially big companies, in a way that you couldn't before. And education, so online classes, sharing learning resources, etc., etc. So, okay, why isn't social media accessible? This is the main reason. If you ever have 30 seconds to tell someone why social media is not accessible, this is the reason. So a few years back, Facebook changed something where all of a sudden code was showing up in their their headers. So here it says span class quo, why sacrifice yourself, whistleblowers, blah, blah, blah. And it's not like everyone got together and said, hey, let's put code in our headings in Facebook. Facebook changed a feature and the code started showing up. Now, most people picked that up immediately, but Crikey, which is like an alternative newspaper in Australia, didn't. And for about 2 weeks, they had code in their headings like this. Facebook changes up to 5 times a day. And the last time I actually managed to get anyone from social media to talk to me, I learnt, and this is probably why they won't talk to me anymore, I learnt that they don't actually have testing teams. What they do is they deploy their updates to their internal team, which might be 10,000 people, and then those people actually log bugs, and then they fix the bugs, and then they deploy it to the general population. So what's wrong with that? If you don't have any staff with using screen readers or reliant just on a keyboard or anything like that, then you're never going to pick up those accessibility issues. And even if they have changed, and a lot of the social media networks have accessibility teams, but we're talking 5 or 10 people, more like 5. They don't have the time or the resources to check everything as it goes out. And so because these systems change so rapidly, even if they manage to make something accessible today, it could be easily gone tomorrow. So that is why it's really, really important to sort of have an underlying belief that social media is inaccessible and that therefore approach it that way. So for example, I did this. I've actually started doing social media testing twice a year instead of once a year, because it changes so often. So this keyboard trap, for example, if you tab to this vertical ellipsis on a video on YouTube, if you activated it, the tab takes you to the first option, not interested, and the next tab takes the user to the address bar. So it's basically a keyboard trap type behaviour. And it was there for about 3 months, and then it was gone. So they do change very quickly. So in 2017 in LinkedIn, we had a button here that was completely unlabelled. In 2018, the button was labelled, but it was labelled button IP 24 DP button. I mean, I don't even know where that came from, right? And then in 2019, the button's just gone. So, you know, these things change all the time. So, okay, now I'll get to the actual testing. What was tested? Standard user journey, register, so actually registering as a new user, log in, read items, submit an item, and add any accessibility features that might be available. And the user functionality was keyboard only, increased text size, and using a screen reader. And I'm a very big believer in having people who are vision impaired do our screen reader testing. If you're not vision impaired and you're using a screen reader, then you're going to have a very different experience. So we have a screen reader tester who's completely vision impaired, and he does all the testing for this, as well as the video player testing as well. We tested against some major WCAG 2 things, like, you know, form labels and headings and stuff like that, but it was not a full audit. The networks in 2016, 17 and 18, we did Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube and Twitter. And 2019, I added Instagram and Pinterest. Next year, I'll do Tumblr, I promise. But it took 3 years of people saying, do Instagram and Pinterest before I did actually do them. And so please note, it's not a complete audit. It's more just we found things that I suppose are accessibility 101 things, and things that would really trip a user up. What is going on? Okay, so first was keyboard accessibility. Now, I know that's terribly unfriendly, but the slides are fully accessible, I promise, so you can grab them. But basically, there was a keyboard trap in Pinterest. Pinterest and Twitter were not accessible to the keyboard. The right-hand column was not keyboard accessible in Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter and YouTube. There was not a valid keyboard focus indicator in Pinterest and Twitter. and there was not a valid keyboard focus order in Instagram or YouTube. So we found that when you first register on Pinterest, you get this more ideas for your board, photography, explore, and that actually was a keyboard trap. So you couldn't go any further than that. And it remained there for several logins. Instagram, this is an example of issues with keyboard focus order. So the keyboard focus order starts at the beginning of the actual actual section, and so things like the Instagram, the profile, etc., is not accessible to the keyboard. What we found a lot is that Twitter, that the right-hand column, in a lot of them, the right-hand column is not accessible to the keyboard because we found that the centre column had infinite scrolling. So basically you just keep loading more content and more content and more content. Facebook addressed this by providing really detailed skip links, so you could skip to that particular section. But infinite scrolling is fairly inaccessible. Autoplay. So we found that there was autoplay on default viewing for desktop, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, and YouTube. And on iOS, it occurred on absolutely everything. Now, autoplay is a known WCAG 2 violation. It's a serious issue, and it will make the system completely inaccessible. And then on top of that, the video could not be paused by the mouse on Pinterest. It could not be paused by the keyboard on Pinterest or Twitter. And it could not be paused by touch on Instagram or Pinterest. And so this is Twitter. Twitter actually used to do really, really well, and then they just, I don't know what happened. They lost their accessibility team or something. That basically autoplay, and then the video was not available to the keyboard, so no one could pause the autoplay. And there's also, a lot of people talk about the ability to turn off autoplay in settings. You couldn't do that on desktop, Pinterest or YouTube, or not properly. And you couldn't do that on iOS, on Instagram, Pinterest or YouTube. And so I know people are like, hey, there's that little button that says you can turn off autoplay but on YouTube, but the fact is that there's infinite scrolling in the comments. So if you're looking at a video that has 10,000 comments, you can never get to the right-hand column to actually turn off the autoplay. The autoplay itself doesn't have a keyboard focus indicator. Last year it wasn't accessible to the keyboard. Page titles and headings. LinkedIn, Pinterest didn't have unique or descriptive page titles. Facebook didn't have a reference to the site in terms of page titles. And so LinkedIn is the page title on home, LinkedIn is the page title on messaging, and this can be really confusing to screen reader users. Facebook page title has no reference to the site, so the page title was just the name of the Facebook group. Headings. None of them had properly nested headings. LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter and YouTube had content coded as a heading. Only LinkedIn had all headings coded appropriately with H1, H2, H3. Only Facebook had all pages start with an H1. And Pinterest had some pages without headings at all. So this is an example of content coded as a heading. Choose the thumbnail that best represents your video. To be able to add custom thumbnails, your account needs to be verified and in good standing. And so that's actually coded as a heading, which can be really confusing to screen readers. So more like this heading in Pinterest, wonderful little div class, as opposed to an H1. I didn't find any class equals headings, but give them time. On this particular page, the only headings are under the little plus and question mark sign, so not referring to the page at all. Inaccessible forms. All of them had fields not coded with label for an ID. Instagram and LinkedIn were the only ones that had field sets with appropriately coded legends. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter were the only ones that didn't have orphaned or multiple field labels, and Twitter and YouTube didn't have properly coded radio buttons. And so this is your, create account on Facebook, and none of it was coded with appropriate field labels. And then we found incorrect use of ARIA and HTML. So invalid ARIA in everything except for Instagram and Pinterest. Inaccessible iframes on everything. JavaScript links on Facebook and YouTube. Empty links on everything except LinkedIn. And missing mandatory attributes on everything except Instagram. And the screen reader, we found, so we did it a little bit differently. A cross meant that they couldn't complete the task at all. An exclamation mark meant they could, but it took them a really, really long time. And this is a very expert screen reader. So couldn't register on Facebook or Instagram at all, and the rest were all really difficult to use. Login was really difficult on Facebook, the others were fairly easy. It was impossible to create a post on Pinterest. Everything else was very difficult. And it was very difficult to read a post with accessibility features on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And that was desktop, and this is iOS. The only ones where register was easily done was LinkedIn and Twitter. Couldn't do it at all on Instagram or Pinterest. Facebook was very hard. Login was difficult on YouTube, the others were okay. Could not create a post with accessibility features on Pinterest. It was difficult on Facebook and YouTube, and it was quite difficult to read a post with accessibility features on YouTube. And the last thing is inconsistency, and inconsistency is a AA requirement, but it's very helpful in terms of making things accessible. And we saw a lot of inconsistency in visuals, in default operation, in functionality and in settings, and it didn't go into this in a lot in the testing. But so for example, on the left, you've got 4 icons, and 3 of them are the same as on desktop, but one of them's different. And so all of a sudden does that mean it's doing something different? Or, who knows? Default operation, so basically the videos autoplay on Instagram on iOS, but they don't on desktop, and you can't upload a photo to Instagram on desktop at all. You can only do it on iOS. And functionality, so the sharing is kind of sharing with in Instagram is sharing with your friends, whereas on desktop it's actually sharing to different social media networks. And settings, so whether videos can autoplay, image descriptions, etc., were completely different whether you were working on desktop or iOS. So there was also a lot of use of ARIA instead of HTML, which is just a really bad idea. HTML is natively accessible, and ARIA should only be used when you can't use HTML. There were also reCAPTCHAs that were triggered, and reCAPTCHAs are not accessible despite what Google says, and there are a lot of colour contrast issues as well. So basically the 5 steps to making sure social media is accessible, knowing that, basically one thing to take out of all that information is that there was never one social media network that was fully accessible. Some were good in some ways and some were good in others, and that's with people with disabilities, they're going to prefer one social media network over another. So the first thing is to make your contact information available on your social media account page. List a primary phone number and email address where a user can reach your agency with questions, and provide a link to your agency website. Repeat content, so this is really important. If you have 3 social media accounts, then all your content needs to go to all 3 social media accounts. Provide options for daily digests where you can send emails out of the content that you sent out, or even weekly digests or things like that. Provide easy points of entry. So if you've got on social media that there's a competition to win an iPad, then that information kind of needs to be on your homepage. It can't be buried in your site somewhere, and multiple outlets. And also put your social media content on your site. Provide alternative apps. So provide contact details to social media support and accessibility teams within your organisation. Provide links to social media accessibility tips and support, and the link that I'm going to send out actually has links to how to use YouTube with a screen reader, etc., because they're not easy to find. Provide links to alternative apps and websites that create an accessible interface for social media. Use clear and simple language. So use camel case, so capitalise the first letter of every word in a hashtag. Avoid abbreviations, limit hashtags, add them only to the end. Avoid misspellings, and when you link to others' content, you need to warn about the lack of transcripts, captions and audio descriptions. And also consider testing your social media with users with disabilities and against WCAG too, and actually reaching out to those social media networks and saying, hey, your stuff is not accessible. You know, if Sainsbury's says that to them, that's probably going to they might take notice of that more than, me doing this testing each year. So very quickly, there's some Facebook tips. Alternative text to images, transcripts of videos, load videos to YouTube and add captions there. There are alternative methods to the desktop interface that are much more accessible. Facely HD on iOS, m.facebook.com and Metal on Android. Instagram, alternative text to images, burn captions into your videos so they're open. Be careful of colour contrast in your images if you're conveying information. LinkedIn, add alternative text, ensure your profile has a clear image. Search for contacts using Google, do not use the LinkedIn search, and do not use the LinkedIn mail system. Pinterest, identify your content as pic, video, or audio. Once saved, you can edit the pin and add a description and burn captions into your videos. Alternative text for Twitter, use camel case and their accessibility tips. Sorry, I'm very aware that I'm running out of time. And there are alternative methods, Easy Chirp, Twitterific, Metal on Android. YouTube, warn users of the autoplay, make sure there's a transcript, captions and audio descriptions. And there are alternative methods to the desktop interface, the accessible interface to YouTube, accessible YouTube and access YouTube. Or you host your videos on YouTube and use a player like OzPlayer or AblePlayer to play them on your site. And one thing I forgot to mention was that OzPlayer is actually free for not-for-profits that have an annual revenue under $1 million, and also for personal use or for sites that have less than 10 videos. We're also half price for not-for-profits that are over that or educational institutions. And that's it. So sorry, that presentation was initially an hour and a half and I thought I got it down, but apparently I didn't get it down enough. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes, I think.
Okay, excellent. Any questions?
I put a couple in slide in, but yeah, something back.
Thank you very much, by the way, first of all. Have a drink.
Yeah. I think my voice held out pretty well, actually. Yeah.
Sure. All right.
Thanks very much. I found that really, really interesting. There's been a few kind of high-profile court cases, I guess, especially in the US, about accessibility. So why is it that social media sites continue to get away with not providing accessible sites to kind of this extent when it's so prolific across so many different metrics?
So there's two reasons. One, they don't care. They're big enough that they don't care. They feel that they are meeting their accessibility requirements by having an accessibility team, but that accessibility team often doesn't have much authority. The people that work in those accessibility teams are fantastic people, but if they don't have any authority, then there's nothing they can do. Secondly, in the US, I'm not sure about here, but also in Australia, if you put content out on social media and it's not accessible because the social media network is not accessible, then you are liable, not the social media network. So if you put stuff out on Facebook and it's not accessible because Facebook's not accessible, they're not going to sue Facebook, they're going to sue you. And so I really do believe in the power of litigation. It's a very unpopular opinion to have, but the reason why the US is leading the world in terms of accessibility compliance is because of the litigation. And yes, there are some drive-by lawsuits, but most of the time they're serious issues. And we've seen in Australia, without litigation, nothing really happens. And in the US, because people are getting sued and settling out of court for millions of dollars, that it is something that people realise they need to put money into. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My questions are similar to that, but more from a developer point of view. I was a developer working at one of these companies. how can we encourage the management of the company to invest time and money to allow us to make the changes necessary to make the website accessible?
Yeah, so sorry, what was the question?
So I'm a developer working at a company similar to these. What I find is that they don't really give us the time necessary to sort of provide auditing and make the websites accessible.
Yeah.
So how can we just encourage them that it's a priority and that we need the time to make them work?
So the W3C has some good stuff about business case return on investment, but also things like the BBC have done a lot of stuff on this as well, especially around things like captions. They find that 80% of people who use captions are not deaf or hard of hearing, and that there's a whole, and I've written an article on accessibility of video, which talks about how you know, the completion of a video doubles if it has captions. A site earns 16% more revenue if its video has captions. Google, you know, references videos higher than text. So that's all obviously video. But there is a real return on investment, and there's also a report by Centre for Inclusive Design, which is an Australian company, on like the money that you make by making stuff accessible. So I can send that to Andrew and send that round. They did a lot of work, and it was with, you know, some big like companies like Accenture and things like that to figure out exactly, maybe it was KPMG, to figure out exactly what would happen if everything was accessible, and they figured out that there'd be like $2 billion more in the tourist industry and stuff like that. And I think that when you're working in a company, there's two ways to explain it to management. And it's always around money. Either you make more money because it's accessible, or you risk being sued and losing money if it's not accessible. And I don't know what the litigation, state is here, but it's more likely you'll kind of get there with, saying, hey, we'll have more users and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a European Accessibility Act that came into effect, but I haven't seen it really kind of push people to do the right thing. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for that. Just wanted to talk to the previous couple of questions. I am an engineer at Twitter, do quite a lot of the
I'm sorry.
minimal, no, it is fine, it is all true. Just to answer the question, internal advocacy is really the only thing you can do. Just keep pushing and trying and talking. And we are finally getting through a little bit. But yeah, there's not a lot you can do.
Twitter was fantastic. It was fantastic until about a year ago.
About a year ago, we started working on a new version, which is about to be released, which is a lot better than the old version. I hope. We'll find out. But
yeah.
Yes. But,
Feel free. Look, I'd love to get your details, because one of the things that I do before I do the social media testing is reach out to them and say, each of them, and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you. So maybe I can say this is in the pipeline, or these are the links that, how to use it with a screen reader or whatever. And I have been met mostly with silence. So it'd be great if I could, have a chat to you, and even if I can tell you, and if nothing official can happen, but you at least know what's happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, I think we'll need to call it a day there. If you have any questions, we can contact you.
I'll be around.
Thanks, mate.
I'm feeling better than I was before.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Cool. So, Jan, thank you so much. Thank you. So you're going to be around at the break for any more questions?
Yes, I will.
Okay, cool. So, Paul, is it okay if I come back in 20 minutes? Is that okay? You're giving me the look. Okay, so we'll come back at 20 past 8, and then, second thought, Robin, Spinks. Is that right? Yeah. Oh, hooray. So welcome back, everyone. First thing, actually, Jan has just mentioned to me she's in London all this week, actually. I said she's here for London Tech Week. She has super kindly said she has a few free slots in her schedule this week. So if anyone would like to schedule some time for her to come in and speak to them as an individual or their company, she's very kindly offered to facilitate that. So I've got a whole bunch of Jan's business cards in my back pocket. So if that's something you're interested in, grab a card off me and you can get in touch with Jan while she's here this week. So Jan, thank you for that. That's very kind.
Cool.
So second talk tonight is by Robin Spinks. Robin is from the Royal National Institute of Blind People. And Robin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you, Andy. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's great to meet some familiar faces and lots more new ones. So really enjoyed that fantastic first talk by Jan. And it's great to be here at the London Accessibility Forum. I used to live in London and I moved back to Scotland about 4 years ago. And I think that was round about the time that this started. So it's great to actually be here, and hopefully this will be the first of many visits to the forum. So I think what you're all doing here is really the most powerful thing. It's coming together and actually consolidating messages and sharing information. And we can't really do enough of that in the community that we work in. So well done, Andy and everyone, for making this happen, and also to the sponsors. So I want to talk tonight a little bit about creating a platform for empathy. It was mentioned in the last session, I think a couple of times, that internal advocacy is a hugely powerful thing for all of us. And sometimes in big organizations that can be a real challenge to make that happen. So we have been lucky enough to be able to collaborate with what was the Transport Systems Catapult, the Connected Places Catapult, to create a tool which is called EYEWARE. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and tell you a little bit about some of our experience in working with it. And also to get some thoughts as well. So before I do that, a little bit about myself. It's interesting how people's careers take interesting paths. I qualified as a careers advisor after I had done a social policy degree at Stirling University. I've spent 19 years working with people with disabilities in 34 countries around the world. I worked for an international NGO before coming to RNIB. And I literally was living out of a suitcase half of the year, just traveling and working all over Africa, South Asia, the Caribbean. So some of the things that I see in my current role, I kind of think the same problems and the same challenges are faced in lots of parts of the world. Sometimes the approaches are comparable and sometimes they're different. Born from the positivity pod, tell me that something can't be done and I'll find a way to make it work. This is true, right? So you can moan about problems or issues, or you can do something positive to fix them. That tends to be the way that I will do it. So when I told the people that I love most in life that I was going to be taking on a job working in hot countries, half the year traveling alone, they said to me, look, but have you forgotten that you've got this condition called albinism and it makes you really pale and susceptible to sunburn? Have you forgotten that? You're going to work in like 40 degrees heat. And have you forgotten that, you're visually impaired? No, I haven't. Love you to bits. Thank you so much for your kind of support. But hey, do you know what? I'm going and I'm going to do it. Sometimes you have to push yourself in life out of your comfort zone. Speak internationally quite a lot, writer and consultant on diversity and inclusion issues. I'm a big fan of using technology, so that's one of the reasons why it's great to be here. Also a dad, husband, friend, gravel rider. Anyone do gravel riding here? Anyone cycle? Do you want to just say yes rather than raise your hand? Because the low vision guy on the bike can't see you. God, that's a scary thought, isn't it? I know you might not go out cycling at the weekend now. Don't worry, I'm a few hundred miles away. And I do tend to cycle behind someone else who can see perfectly well. But do you know what? When you're flying along at 30 miles an hour on gravel, it's pretty exhilarating. I wouldn't want to miss it just because of poor eyesight. There are ways of making yourself more visible. There are ways of using technology to help you understand the environment you're in. I love all that stuff. So Tech Evangelist, I think that's one of the things that I have acquired since being at RNIB, we work with all sorts of different brands, from small app studios to companies who produce household showers, to national cash registers, to supermarkets, banks, Samsung. I was quite lucky at the end of 2017. I got this phone call from Samsung, and they said, look, you do some outdoor stuff, and I was doing some running at the time, still am occasionally, and they said, look, how do you fancy being nominated to carry the Olympic torch? And I thought it was a wind-up. So I had to check with the person in PR, and it wasn't. And about a week later, they rang me back and said, you're going to Busan in South Korea to carry the Olympic torch. So there it is there. Not sure about the torchbearer's uniform. I think it's a bit reminiscent of somebody that people don't want to talk about anymore these days. But it was a fantastic experience, and just having a couple of minutes literally carrying the torch in what is a historic event was really quite a moment. I also love my photography, so this is where I live, right opposite this island, which is on the Forth Estuary opposite Edinburgh, and that was about maybe 10 to 6 in the morning. There's something magical when the sun comes up. For us, those of us with low vision, it's an incredible time of day as well, because you don't get any problems with glare and too much brightness that you do later on in the day. So love taking pictures at kind of times of the day. This is the Union Canal, do a bit of canoeing as well. And that is actually taken above the busiest motorway in Scotland, the M8 motorway that connects Edinburgh and Glasgow. And it's a bit like serenity and calm above the chaos. It's quite special. Last picture, anyone know where that is? It's the Forth Rail Bridge. So it's the 8th wonder of the world. I do a bit of sailing, so I got the chance to go and just sail around it. And I had no idea what sort of structure it was until I got really close to it, because you don't see it well when you look at it from a distance. So for a lot of people with low vision, using photography and using images is a really helpful way of learning about what's going on around you. One last picture. I've got a 4-year-old on the way to nursery in the morning. He said to me, Daddy, look, stop, look at that. And I said, it's a bush. And he said, no, that. I said, it's a leaf. And he said, no, that. I said, what is it? He said, look at it. And I went up really close to it, and it's a ladybird. So I had to photograph it. But, there's all these things going on around you and not necessarily happening to you in an accessible way. So photography, super powerful. Imagery, super powerful in explaining and helping us to understand. So RNIB is seeking a world where there are no barriers to people with sight loss. One of our purposes is that we're a catalyst for change. And kind of thinking about that, we do a lot of innovation work. Quite often we're referred to as the Victorian charity in Silicon Valley. And that's not connected with Victoria that Jan was talking about. But, it's thinking about a charity that grew up in the Victorian era, started by a guy who wanted to pursue people's desires to read and enable people to read. And today we're still very much about that, but about embracing technological change and also partnering with tech companies and innovators to enable greater inclusion for blind and partially sighted people, and also generating income through collaboration and facilitating the development of attractive, accessible products. So, do all sorts of consultancy, assessment and training with leading global brands, Google, Samsung, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. And that can be anything from a web accessibility audit. My colleague James is here tonight, who works in that area. It can be training for staff to help them to better understand. It can literally be anything. If you've got a £10 note in your pocket, this is not the moment where a Scotsman gets his money out. I don't have any, but if you've got a £10 note, it actually has accessibility features on it that we worked with the Bank of England to devise. And the science and the chemistry involved in actually creating accessibility marks on banknotes is pretty phenomenal. I had no idea how much was involved in doing that. You would think you just make a couple of marks. There's so much to think about. How does that age? How is it stored? How is it dispensed? All those things. was a real lesson in kind of polymer technology. So the World Blind Union is a global umbrella that brings together 191 organisations, a bit like RNIB. And we're very lucky because we're quite involved in World Blind Union. The Technology Committee, I vice chair with a guy at Utah University, Sachin Pavitharan. And we've both got low vision, and we've kind of been pushing this agenda of let's think in a much broader way about the way in which we engage people and get them started in thinking, particularly in big organisations. And a good starting point is that an inclusive product is a desirable product, which empowers people and it avoids feelings of exclusion. So we kind of aggregated that from talking to lots and lots of people. Some of the companies that we've recently been working with, Bank of England, I mentioned, Samsung, Storm Interface, Apple Swift Playgrounds. We just created some materials to enable blind kids to be able to code using Swift Playgrounds. That was a recent Click piece covering that. And the kind of wonder of it, if you get to see it, is blind children in a school in South London, and they're basically controlling a parrot in the classroom, and they're getting it to do flips. A parrot drone, that is, not a parrot. I didn't need to clarify that for you guys. But it was amazing. They're using Swift to basically get it to flip and to land and take off. EYEWARE, which is a really interesting concierge accessibility service that some of you may have come across. Absolutely fantastic service. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, please take a look. Sky, Royal Bank of Scotland, Microsoft, Scottish Power, Amazon, a whole range. And I mention those purely because there is no limit to the organisations that we will engage with. And people, organisations in any arena, we will engage and work with. So just mentioning a little bit about voice first technology, because we've been doing a lot of talking to people about this recently. So people of all ages and capabilities love voice first, a level playing field for people of all abilities, mainstream products that everyone can use, an enormous potential to be implemented beyond the current applications. We're thinking a lot about how we make some of our services accessible via voice first, workplace applications, layering it on top of other things that people might already be doing. I mean, one of the first things, if you think about using voice first and using something like a smart speaker, one of the first interactions I had with that was using Skyscanner. Now imagine going to the website, Skyscanner, and entering in everything that you need to put in, and then try it using a voice first interaction. I think that's kind of quite an interesting example. So EYEWARE, if you're interested in downloading this, you can go to the App Store or the Play Store. It may temporarily be missing from the Play Store. It will be back very soon. It's EYEWARE. Where this really came from was that we're working with the Transport Systems Catapult, who were really looking at where's the UK going to be, where does the UK want to be in terms of intelligent mobility over the next 10 years. And that would include everything from autonomous vehicles, self-guided transport systems, pods, innovative ways of getting around last mile solutions. But we discovered that they had a lot of technology available to them that could allow them to create things that would be really helpful, not just for the work that they were doing, but also from the point of view of inclusion and inclusive design. So we kind of began this conversation about, RNIB for a long, long time has used something called SimSpecs. Has anyone used SimSpecs? Yeah? Yep, cool. So they can be rigid plastic, or some of them are kind of card and plastic. But basically what they do is allow you to create a simulation. So you could simulate something like cataract, or diabetic retinopathy, or macular degeneration, or retinitis pigmentosa, any of the commonest eye conditions that we would quite often come across when we meet people who come to see RNIB. But the issue with that is that it's static. You put it on, right, and you take it off, and you've got a sense of maybe what kind of practical barriers someone might experience. But do you know what? You've just got the choice to take it off. I wear spectacles, and all that they do is they darken down when I'm outside, and they mean that glare doesn't too negatively impact me. And they're kind of like a bit of a style statement as well, aren't they? But they've also, maybe not, they've got a little magnet on the right-hand leg, and someone was saying to me, what is that about? And I said, I'm watching you. They get a bit worried. I'm actually not. That's purely plastic with a couple of ties and a magnet. But what it does is it allows me to place a small assistive device onto the leg of the spectacles, and it magnetically clips into place. And what that device will do is it will look around me, and if it spots someone that I know who's in my contacts and they come into view of the device, it'll say Andy Ronksley, right? And then the next time it sees him, it'll say it again. And I have to just tell the device that person's name so that it can associate their image with their name. So that's quite clever. But it'll also do things like I can point at a display board in an exhibition, and it will start reading what is on that board. That's really helpful. There's a number of assistive technologies will do that, but that's why I've got that little clamp on there. But what we wanted to do was think about, well, how can you use augmented reality? How could you use something like a cardboard viewer? So a simple, VR cardboard viewer that you would pick up at a PC World or wherever. How could you use that with your phone to enable you to do a kind of better type of simulation? How could that be something that kind of was bigger than SimSpecs? And also SimSpecs are quite expensive. If you have to buy a set of SimSpecs, it's about 120 quid to buy the box. And it comes in a great big case that you would have to bung on the overhead rack in the train. That's terribly old school. No one wants to be carrying that around with them. So if you could have it on your phone, that would be a whole lot easier. So that's kind of where we came from. Blindness and visual impairment are kind of among the most feared disabilities. So routinely, there are surveys carried out where people are told, they're asked, what would you fear most in terms of a health condition or disability? And blindness, not surprisingly, blindness and visual impairment are very near the top of that ladder. Okay, and it's consistent. It's always in the top 3. And that's a lot to do with the fact that we live in a very visual world, and wherever you go, all the time that you're awake, people are absorbing or attempting to absorb visual information. So if you lose a lot of your sight, you have to adjust in all sorts of ways. It's a bit different for me because I was born with a condition that basically means that I can see the top letter on the eye test chart. I can see that there are 2 letters beneath it, but I can't see them well enough to tell you what they are. I used to guess as a kid, and then I learned that was a pretty stupid thing to do, so I stopped doing it. But basically the rationale there is that I have no sense of loss or deficit. What I can see, the vision that I've got, is entirely normal to me. So I've just adapted as I've gone through life. That's why I'm doing stupid things like gravel riding and jumping out of planes. And also because it pushes you out of your comfort zone. But if you've lost your sight, that probably is a bigger transition because you've done everything in a highly visual way. We work with people who have been, makeup artists, or they've worked in film and they've lost their vision. Now, can you imagine if you're doing a highly visual job and you lose a big part of your eyesight or you lose your sight altogether? That pretty much changes the way that you do everything. And we wanted to try and capture some of that. So often people struggle to understand the impacts. Traditional simulation is typically static and it does not convey gradients and fluctuations. So by that I mean that if you have a condition like diabetic retinopathy, it's not the same on Tuesday as it is on Thursday or Wednesday afternoon or Friday morning or Sunday night. People find the condition fluctuates as their stress levels change, as other health aspects change. They find that what they're able to see, alters. And you can imagine trying to explain that to the people in your office. If you could see something maybe quite well on Tuesday, on Wednesday it was a bit harder, very difficult for people to understand that. But when you give them a simulation, all of a sudden that sort of thing starts to become a lot more crystallized, a lot clearer. So EYEWARE is really intended to be another tool alongside narrative and personal storytelling. It's never going to be used as an alternative to those things, because the most powerful thing is storytelling and personal narrative, and that really puts a lot of things into context. But if you've only got 3 minutes with the CEO, and I had an occasion recently where I had 3 minutes with the CEO of a big company, and you might be thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? What might I miss out? What am I not going to cover? And you could be a bit anxious about that. Or you could just ask them the question, this morning, have you sent a WhatsApp message? If you go into any group and you ask that question at a training event, almost everyone puts their hand up. I can't see their hand going up. So I just say, look, can you say yes? And they all say yes. So who here has sent a WhatsApp message today? Yes. Yep, so lots of people. And you find that everywhere. So, you could ask them something like that, or you could talk about who's going to be going into a shop later today to buy anything. And almost everybody will be doing that, whether it's an online shop or a physical shop. They'll be going to do that. Or they might even just be going to buy fuel for their car or recharge their car or whatever. But they're going to do something that's a visual job. So if you can put them in that position, and then you can introduce them to what might happen if you didn't have the amount of eyesight that you currently have. And you can visually show them that. You can show them in EYEWARE the condition early onset. You can show them a kind of moderate and a more severe progression of any of those common conditions. And that has been the kind of catalyst for many light bulb moments in using it in our advocacy. And I think, that's the one thing that genuinely becomes the springboard for change. The light bulb moment becomes the springboard for change. Whatever industry you go to, that is true. If you can get an inspirational, charismatic leader to reach that light bulb moment, that's when things start to happen. You hear people saying things like, oh, we've no budget for this, there isn't a budget for that. That's all relative. It's all relative. There's a budget for lots of different things. It's all about how it's badged. We've seen examples of where there is no budget, and we've used this tool, and all of a sudden, there's like £50,000 to invest in inclusive design or accessibility, because it's been deemed to be more important than it was previously understood to be. So a transition has taken place. People have gone from understanding accessibility as being over here to understanding it as being right here, front and center for every single business strand in their company. And when you can make that happen, that's when you get that light bulb moment. And I might be talking here about the perspective of visual impairment. This actually is helpful because although we're focusing people on visual impairment, we're encouraging and we're assisting companies to work with frameworks that are pan-disability. So WCAG or the public sector equality duty, well, whatever it is, it's pan-disability. We're just coming from an organisation that's got a particular standpoint, but we're doing that taking into account the needs of others as well. Some of the challenges that we've experienced with it as well, creating a tool which is currently not fully accessible. That's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, this is the guy from the RNIB telling you this. Why did we do that? So there is no accessibility framework for the VR engine in Android or iOS. Currently that's not available. But if we said, right, okay, because that's not available, we'll not bother creating anything, it doesn't move the agenda forward. So, this kind of creates another urgency because people look at it and they rightly say, well, I can't have voiceover support with that app. That's true. That's currently not possible. Hopefully it will be one day. And actually to get to that point where we increase understanding and we have accessibility with it, we need to go on a journey and we've got to bring people with us on that. And that's been a challenge for us to actually say to some people, I as one of the originators I didn't code this app, but I worked very, very closely with the people who did, and I was responsible for a lot of the kind of comms content that went into it, the eye conditions in some cases, checking the kind of authenticity of the filters, a whole bunch of stuff. But, you know, as one of the originators who is visually impaired, actually saying, look, the reason we're doing this, we're doing it with conviction because we want to change people's attitudes, we want to change people's mindsets, move them closer towards that more holistic way of thinking about inclusive design. And that's when the magic will begin to happen, when people get to that point. So moving people's thinking forward has been a big step, getting people away from SimSpecs. There are occasions where SimSpecs will work better than EYEWARE. So I recently went to a flower show. We had a stall at the Hampton Court Flower Show because we'd worked with a garden designer. I said that we did everything from showers and cash machines and apps and websites, doing gardens as well. We did a work with a garden designer to design a sensory garden, and we wanted to basically use simulation, and it was super bright outside. So actually using SimSpecs worked a bit better on that occasion. But indoors, typically it'll be a better option. But it's also about enabling change and an organizational mind shift. That's a really hard thing to do. It's a really tough thing to do. I remember being in Microsoft in Seattle 5 years ago, and some very senior people in Microsoft said, what do you reckon we should do? Where should we go? And I said, what you should do is you start creating accessibility apps for the iPhone. And I thought one of them was going to throw their Surface Book at me. What did they go away and do? They started creating apps for the iPhone. Accessibility apps for the iPhone. That makes a hell of a lot of sense. And actually, those apps, in some cases, have gone on to win awards. Seeing AI, Soundscape, others that are coming. So, you know, you've got stuff built for a particular platform, but where you can capture an audience and you can extend understanding, that's when you can actually make kind of great things happen. Some of the opportunities, very briefly before I wrap up: accessibility framework for VR and AR and iOS and Android. Collaboration with others in this space. So we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're talking to a lot of other people who are doing similar things, and we'd love to do more. We've got a whole bunch of ideas as to how we could kind of make it better, stronger, richer, faster, more engaging. And that's where we want to go. It's a journey rather than being an end point. You know, and even getting that across to the community we work with and some of our colleagues has been a challenge. You know, this app arriving, that's the beginning, it's not the end. So layering of voice, images, video, and text, how can we kind of make all of that happen in a really positive way? Very, very briefly, kind of 3 challenges are ahead. So artificial intelligence and computer vision already changing the landscape for our community. We've seen what 5G will radically do in terms of changing connectivity, and the Internet of Things changing the way that people experience all sorts of services, will greatly enhancing kind of accessibility in the workplace. So this is one tool in a whole framework of different connected opportunities, and we think that the use case that people have for it currently will be different from what they have in a year's time. It's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing ideas together and getting closer towards that light bulb moment. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Robin. Any questions from the audience? I have one. Can you do anything with EYEWARE without the cardboard viewer, or do you definitely need
You can, yes. Yeah. So that's a great question. If you use EYEWARE without the cardboard viewer, what you have to do is download the app, and when you open the app, hit Simulator, and basically just use one tap of your finger anywhere on the screen, and that will bring up a menu of buttons. The tricky bit, and I said that actually demoing it and showing it as someone with low vision can be tricky, is that you'll spot a tiny red dot on screen once you've tapped the screen once and you've seen those buttons appear. And what you need to do is tilt your phone backwards and forwards, side to side, to get the red dot on top of the condition name that you would like to simulate. So you can do all of that without the cardboard viewer. And actually, when we're training people in how to use it, we tend to show them it without the cardboard viewer, purely because it's much easier to have an interactive demonstration doing that. But do download it, try it out, let us know what you think. And we'd love to hear if people have ideas and thoughts about how it can kind of go further. It's a journey, we're at the beginning of it, but we're really excited about what potentially we could do. Could you use the mic? Your mic is good. Yeah, this is better, isn't it? We're super excited about collaborating with other people and basically making it work, you know, across the platforms, but maybe even also extending it into other disabilities, because we want to show people, of course, what a visual impairment simulation might be like. And that's worth clarifying. You know, we can't fully simulate blindness or visual impairment, but we can give people a practical insight into some of the everyday obstacles that someone might encounter. And that's how we kind of nudge a little closer to the light bulb moments. Cool. Any other questions? Everyone's tired now, aren't they? They want to get home. Thinking about trains and pubs.
Yep, there's one over there.
Yeah.
I'll take it off. Oh, is it? Okay.
Do you want that one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, great talk, thank you. I was just wondering, what's a good way of using EYEWARE to get buy-in from people around the business? I've tried doing it with the specs and getting to view websites and stuff like that.
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry, I missed it.
I'm just trying to use EYEWARE as a persuasion tool for people to buy into accessibility and stuff. I've kind of used it as getting people to use websites and stuff while wearing the Google thing. But is that a good way of doing it, or is there any other ways?
You could do that. So you could give people a cardboard and you could get them to try and access a site. The other thing that we've done is we've created a kind of training session, which we call Digital Access Needs and Customer Experience, and it gets shortened to DANCE. And what that does is basically, we've done it with Sky and Scottish Power and a couple of other companies, but we're basically running a session where we use EYEWARE as the training vehicle. So that's another option, is to actually use it as part of a structured session. And in doing that, we do some tasks with it, but we also do a lot of scenario planning where we look at it on screen and then we do some group-based activities. So by all means, please do get in touch if you want to kind of pick up on that one. But yeah, I think embedding it into a broader training activity is a really good way to do it. Or to work with a decision maker, you know, if you get time with the CEO, get it on their radar, but just getting them to try out the cardboard with the phone in it, with a condition, and maybe just go for a walk around the building with them, for example, or go into your website or look at your app, for example. Any of those things would be potentially really good use of it.
Brilliant, thank you.
You mentioned the Microsoft apps, accessible apps. You mentioned they should make them. Were they apps had accessibility baked into them, or were they particular apps that were for to make differently able people? Yeah.
Yeah. So in the case of Microsoft, essentially what we were saying to them at the time was, hasn't the world changed incredibly fast? Microsoft. Some people will remember when Microsoft used to ship disks inside boxes, and you used to do an upgrade to Windows 7, or Vista. Remember that? Anyone remember Vista? That wasn't a great
want to forget it, really. Yeah.
So basically that was the way that people thought about Microsoft, and it's obviously moved now towards what they like to call an evergreen product, where it's constantly updating, by the week. And what we'd said is that the world around accessibility has changed really fast. We've seen lots and lots of disabled users, and in particular visually impaired users, gravitating towards iOS for really solid reasons. And therefore there was a big community of disabled users who were using iOS that, if a company that makes software were to create exemplar applications, that would be a really good platform to create them for. So that kind of begun a whole accessibility initiative around apps. And some of that has, filtered into some of Microsoft's own apps, for example. So things like, Outlook and Skype for Business, and the whole family of Microsoft apps. There's now quite a big effort underway inside Microsoft to have a bigger focus on accessibility. And that's been a lot about leadership as well. So, we kind of tried to get engagement with Microsoft in the days of Steve Ballmer, and it never really got anywhere. When Satya Nadella came on board, he is a person who has direct experience of, he has people with disabilities in his family. So it's an incredibly important thing for him personally as a leader to be infusing the culture of accessibility inside Microsoft and to be enthusing other people. So that's helpful. I think wherever there's a passionate leader who believes strongly in accessibility, that's a tremendously powerful message. It's a bit like, the kind of famous Tim Cook stuff about a shareholder asking how much it costs Apple to do accessibility. And Tim Cook's response is basically, if you want to know how much this costs, you should probably sell your stock. It sends out a really powerful message when you've got charismatic leaders. And that's why using this tool, if that's just to get at a director in the company and get them on board and bring them along, make it something that they can then tell other people about. And then you begin to cascade that enthusiasm and that knowledge. And if you were able to show them EYEWARE, but you were also able to show them, for example, what an application may have looked like before accessibility was taken into consideration, and then show them what it looks like afterwards, that's powerful as well. And that might even be thinking about really simple visual things like having a dark theme or a high contrast mode or bold fonts and bold keyboard and larger text, just seeing how much easier it is for everybody to read and to access, as well as the people that it's intended to help.
Cool, thank you. Any more?
Thanks.
Okay.
If anyone wants to chat further, I'm on Twitter. It's just @RobinSpinks. And thanks very much, guys, for all your questions and for listening. It's been a blast. Hope to come back.
Cool. Thank you, Robin. Cool. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hope you've had an enjoyable evening and you've learnt some new stuff. If you do want to join us, we're going to go to the pub, the Christopher Hatton, so it's 5 minutes away, if that. If you want one of Jan's cards, come and grab me. I've got a whole bunch here. Next event is July 22nd, Monday, July 22nd. So again, just a quick thank you to all of our sponsors, so Sainsbury's and Barclays, for all the venue and the money to do all this kind of stuff. So a round of applause, please. And then My Clear Text and Meetup Video, who just make this whole thing look a lot more professional than it has any right to. Okay, that's it, guys. Hopefully see you next month.